All right, hi, welcome. My name is Kalika. I am a motion designer and character animator based in the New York City area, and I'm also a motion design and animation educator. So I'm super excited to show you guys how to turn one of my super gnarly sketches into a beautiful animation ready design. So over here in Illustrator, I have a little before after for you guys so that you can see what it is that we're going to make. We start off with this very simple sketch, and then we move on and we make this rather more sophisticated design. It's still got that youth to it. It still looks like a young design overall, but it's far more sophisticated than this one, and it's pretty much ready to animate. So without further ado, let's get started. This tutorial is really designed for people who maybe have some Illustrator experience and are just getting started with the software, or if you are a seasoned designer and you're wondering like, hey, what are some of the things I should keep in mind when I'm designing for animation? This tutorial is absolutely for you. I'm going to be going over a bunch of stuff. I'm going to start fairly simple, starting off with the interface and how to use geometric shapes to build things, how to use the Pathfinder, and so on. And I'm also going to then move into how to pick colors from a photo using Adobe Color. We're going to go over some basic color theory stuff, like value structure, warm versus cool, how to make things advance and recede. And we're also going to go over how to work with gradients. Now, one thing that happens a lot of times when we work with a lot of gradients is that our animation ends up having these kind of stripes when it goes to digital. And I'm also going to show you how to get rid of those stripes, how to get it so that it looks really, really beautiful when it goes to a digital format like a JPEG or a GIF or GIF. All right, so I see we have Carol, Anthony, Michael. Welcome all of you, and Reiko, and I'm just super excited to show you guys this stuff. Okay, so first of all, we have some work files, and the work files, you'll find the link to them in the description. It's a bit.ly link, and you can get to the bit.ly link, and that will take you over to my Google Drive. And in Google Drive, you will find AI sketch to landscape. And then I also have this document. And the document is really our agenda for today. And it walks you through all the stuff that we are going to be doing in the order we're going to be doing it. In our sketch to landscape folder, if you want to play along, all you got to do is right click this folder and choose download. Okay. Now I'm seeing from my streaming software that there is a bit of a lag. So it's about like a 15-second lag. So if you have a question that comes up while you're working along with me or while you're watching me do this and you're watching live, please type the question right away into the chat. Don't delay, because there is that lag between what you see and, well, between what I do and what you see. Okay? All right. Awesome. So you're going to download these files just by right-clicking and choosing download. And they shouldn't be too big. And once they're downloaded, you'll be able to get started. And I changed the resolution of my screen so it would be a little bit better for you guys to see. So here we go. Okay, so I have that now, and I'm just going to start fresh. So in my Finder or Windows Explorer, I got to unzip that. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to open the files. And here we have our landscape sketch. And we're going to create this landscape sketch at 1920 by 1080. But I can see that this resolution is rather low. It's only 300 by 300, which isn't great, but it's okay for a sketch because we're just going to be taking that sketch and making something bigger out of it, right? So let's go into Illustrator. And in Illustrator, we're going to start over with a brand new file. And the file we're going to use is from the Art and Illustration section of the templates. And we're going to choose the 1920 by 1080 template, but we're not done yet. We actually have to go in here and fuss with some things. So I go over to where it says points, and I'm going to change that over to pixels. Now, the reason why I choose this one is because it has the least bells and whistles. If you use the one that's designed specifically for film and video, it's got a transparent background, it's got all these extra guidelines that we really don't need. All we need is a blank white canvas, and this is going to accomplish that. So just making sure that that's set to pixels, and then I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to choose more settings. And this way I can see like what all the settings are completely, and I can just go ahead and create my document. Now, if you are creating designs for animation, the first thing you always want to check is that you are working in RGB color space. If you're not working in RGB color space, your After Effects or your Premiere Pro is not going to recognize the file that you bring in. So to change that, you're going to go to the File menu, go to Document Color Mode, and just make sure you're set to RGB. Okay, so I'm just going to close up any windows I don't need at the moment, and I'm working just in the Essentials workspace. I don't need anything more than that. And I want to place in my drawing. And this method, if you've ever taken one of my classes, I refer to it as the cheap lightbox method. And by cheap lightbox, I mean that we're going to import this drawing, we're going to reduce its opacity, and we're going to use it as a guide for our illustration. To do that, we're going to go to the File menu, we're going to go to Place. I wish it was called Import, but it's not, it's called Place. And in the Place thing, I'm going to go to my desktop, locate that folder that I just downloaded, and pull up Landscape Sketch. And I'm going to hit, oh, before I do anything, make sure your options are showing and make sure link is turned off, because we want to actually embed this right in there. We want it to be like nice and perfect. So no link, no template, no nothing. And I'm just going to hit place. Now when you do that, it's going to give you your like little placement icon, and you can place your illustration just by click dragging, and you don't have to hold shift or anything until and unless you release your mouse. Now if you release your mouse prematurely, you are going to have to continue scaling this larger. Now I can scoot up in my canvas by holding the space bar while I drag downward, and now I can see the artboard, which is what they call a canvas in Illustrator, and I can see my sketch. In order to resize this, I make sure that I'm in the selection tool, which is in the upper left-hand corner, and I come over and I'm just going to move this over, and I'm going to pull the corner. And to keep it proportional, hold the shift key down, and that's going to keep it at the same proportions as your original. Okay, so that's pretty good. And you can make it a little bit smaller maybe so that you have a little bit more sky, and just like center it like that. Okay? And just a quick overview of the windows that we're working with today. We have our toolbox on the far left, we have our artboard in the center, we have our layers on the far right, and we have our properties hidden behind our layer tab. In a little bit, we're going to open up our Pathfinder window. We'll be working with the gradient window, and we'll be working with the color window. And I use the words window and panel interchangeably. They mean the same thing. It just means these little tabby things. And if you're ever missing a window or panel, you can bring it up by going to the window menu. Now, once you have imported your sketch, you can double click on the layer that contains the sketch, and you can just type in sketch or drawing. Okay, and to actually select a whole layer, you want to click the little belly button next to the layer name in the layer panel. And then you can go over to properties and simply reduce the opacity of the entire layer all at once. Okay, now if you're just joining us now, make sure you download those work files. They're linked in the description. And I'm going to lock this layer because I don't want to add anything else to this layer. I just want to make more layers underneath it. To make more layers, remember you want to go down to the very bottom of the layer panel, and you want to click on this little box with a plus in it. Okay, and on this layer, we're going to start doing our illustration. So the easiest tool to start with really is our geometric drawing tools. We're going to begin by making the clouds, but you can see down here in our toolbox that we begin with a default white color filling and blank stroke. So we don't really want that. We want some kind of a fill, but we don't want it to be white. And the fill is, remember, the color that's inside of the container that is our path. Illustrator is all about those paths. Anytime you use any kind of shape drawing tool, it creates that path, and that path can have a filling, which is your color. It can have a stroke, which is a line around it, and you can choose whether you only have a fill, you only have a stroke, you have both, or probably the most confusing is that you can have a path with neither stroke nor fill. And then you can fill it in with whatever you want. You can fill it in with you can fill it in with text if you so choose. So I'm going to go over here and change the color. So I'm going to double click on fill, and I'm going to change it to just an arbitrary color. Okay, so I'm going to just use some kind of a blue color, and the blue color doesn't matter because we're going to change it later. That's one of the saving graces of Illustrator, is that when you make something, you can always change it later. So I'm going to click and hold on the rectangle tool. I'm going to switch over to the ellipse tool, also known as a circle, and I'm going to draw up my clouds, but I want my layer to be under my sketch. This way I can always see my sketch present at all times. I'm going to hold the shift key down, and I'm going to pull that circle, making sure that the sketch layer is already locked, and then I can move the circle by taking the selection tool and dragging inside of that circle shape until it's the place where I want it. I can continue pulling circles by using the ellipse tool, and if I hold that shift key down, it's going to keep it at a 1-to-1 ratio. If I want it to be a funky looking circle, I don't have to hold the shift key down. And I'm just going to go over to the selection tool and just move this guy like so. Okay, so I'm making a series of overlapping circles. I want one in the middle. It's okay if that one's not a perfect circle, but for the most part, I want all of my circles that make up this guy. Oh, so you can also, after you draw the circle, you can just move it by dragging the very middle dot there and holding shift, and just going to make that last guy there. Okay. And again, if you have any questions at all, just type them into the chat as soon as they come into your head, because there is about a 15-second delay, which is significant. I'm going to hold the shift key down and just pull this, and then come over here, and I'm doing all of my adjustments with the selection tool. Okay, so here's this guy, and I'm just going to fill it in because I don't want any gaps. Now, to check whether there are gaps or not, let's just make a new layer underneath, and we're going to fill that in with black. So to make a black layer, I'm just going to double click where it says fill. I'm going to switch over to here, and I'm going to grab my rectangle tool. Now, if you run into the problem that whatever layer you have selected keeps changing, well, the answer to that is just click off of everything. So before I make any changes to color down here for the next thing, I make sure that I click off of everything, and then I come back over and start doing whatever it is that I'm doing. Okay, so here's my black layer, and now I can turn off the sketch, and I can see that, yes, indeed, that's filled in. Now, one thing that a lot of new illustrators do, like one kind of bad habit that new illustrators tend to have, is that they do a lot of copy paste. And in nature, there is no copy paste. In nature, if there's 3 trees, they are significantly different from each other, even if they're the same species, genus, phylum, whatever. Like, even if they're exactly the same tree grown from different acorns of the same mama tree, they're not exactly the same. So whenever possible, just draw it fresh. Okay. Now, suppose you want to pull up this color in particular, you can grab your eyedropper tool. The hotkey for that is letter I, and then turning off your sketch, just click on that color and then turn on the sketch again. Notice that if I click on this when the sketch is on, it's going to choose white, which is a problem. So here it's selecting the correct color. Okay, so now I'm going to draw more circles. So I'm going to grab up my ellipse tool and I'm going to draw more circles. So we're just going to draw them and then change their size in a moment. Okay, and if you have any questions at all, please feel free to ask them. Don't feel shy. Okay, and I'm going to take my selection tool and just place those where I want them. And maybe I want an extra one. If you want to duplicate, you can hold the Alt or Option key and just drag one across, and then you can adjust the size of that one. So I generally avoid duplicating unless I really want something to look exactly the same as the other one. And whenever I'm working with natural landscapes, I try to keep it fairly organic. So this circle is not actually necessary to get rid of something. Just hit the delete key or backspace on your keyboard, it'll get rid of it. So I'm just moving that one there. And this guy, move it there. Just fussing a little bit. Turning on the black, turning off the sketch, and I can see that I kind of like that. Okay. And then I'm going to move on to my final one. So to truly select a layer, make sure that you also click on that little belly button thing and then come over, grab up the selection tool and draw. So you might be wondering like, okay, well, you've made a lot of circles. Where are they? And remember, you can always find whatever it is that you've made just by going inside of your layer, and you'll see all of the paths, and they're named such clever things as ellipse and also ellipse. You can rename them by double clicking and renaming them, of course, but I usually don't when they're paths, especially when there's so many. I'm going to duplicate this little guy and put it over here. I think that's going to look cute. And then again, just double checking with the black that there's no gaps. Fabulous. All right. So I have my clouds and now I want to merge them together. And there's this wonderful window called the Pathfinder window. And I actually have a tutorial on specifically geometric shapes and the Pathfinder. If you click on the Pathfinder is, I call it the cookie cutter because you can really make lots of different kinds of cookies with it. And it's all about like taking your dough and cutting it up into different pieces of cookie or combining the dough into different cookies. So we're going to select with our selection tool all of these. See, I drew a little box around it, and I'm going to merge them together using the Pathfinder first option here, which is called Unite. Now, if you are anything like me, that makes you nervous. You're like, well, what if I want to change things about this? Well, in that case, what you can do is swivel open your layer, click your first ellipse and shift click your last, and then you can group it. Okay. Alternatively, I think you can just do it like this. Command G or Control G will make it a group. Alternatively, you can find it here under Object Group, but this already is one, so the only option that it gives you is Ungroup. Over here, I'm going to group that as well. And now, since they're not grouped, I have that option to group. And then these guys as well. And you don't have to like draw a box around everything and outside of it. You can just do it inside. That's fine. So I have all this stuff and I'm going to group that as well. Okay, and now I have 3 groups here. And what I like to do in terms of like non-destructive image design is I like to duplicate these groups, and you can do that right here in the layers panel just by taking your Alt or Option key and dragging one of the groups. So if I do this, see how it gives me like a little fist with a hand next to it, and then I can release, and then I can do the same thing here, and I want to pull it like in between the 2 groups. See how there's like a little line there, and then I release, and then Option drag up like this, and then I release. Okay, so how are we doing? If there's any questions, please type those right into the chat and I'll be happy to help you out with it. Okay, so I have my group here and I want to merge it down. I want to unite it. So I'm going to use this Unite option. And look, it made a path with all of those single ellipses in one. So if I click off of, well, if I turn off the group that it was based on and I hit letter A on my keyboard, you can see all of those paths. Okay, you can see all of those path points. And I'm just zooming in, and each of these path points are creating that container of the path. So whereas when we were in our group, if I click here, see all of those paths and how they're like overlapping ellipses. So this is my like little trick for keeping the original but also having the merged version. Okay, so I'm in the zoom tool to zoom in like this. I'm just gonna hold the Option or Alt key to zoom out. So I'm turning off the duplicate groups, and then I'm selecting each of these individual groups and just merging them down. Select this guy and merging it down. Nice. So those are done. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to build our mountains. And to build the mountains, we're going to use the pen tool, and I'm going to use a different color. So with the selection tool, I make sure I'm clicked off of everything. I'm going to double click my fill and choose a contrasting color just for now. I'm going to take my pen tool and I'm just going to draw simple triangles. So remember, with the pen tool, when you click, it creates like a sticky substance that comes off of the pen, and then you're going to move that down and then click again, and then you're going to move that over and click again, and then when you come back to the beginning, it gives you this little circle next to the pen, which means you're going to close it. And then to adjust the points that you've drawn, you can hit letter A for open arrow and then click and move those points. Okay, so now I have that triangle. I'm going to make another triangle, but this time I want it to be a different color. So I'm going to switch over to the selection tool, click off, double click the color and choose a different color. So not a drastically different color, but just different enough so that I can tell that it's a totally different mountain. I'm going to choose my pen tool, click up here, click down on the ground, click over here, and then click back up at the top. And then again, I can hit letter A and just move these points. Okay. All right, and clicking off again, because otherwise when I choose that new color, it's gonna change the color of whatever I have selected, and that's not good. So I'm gonna double click the fill once more. I'm going to choose just a slightly different color once more, and I'm going to grab my pen tool again. And the pen tool we're using, friends, is the one that's up here, not the curvature tool, but the pen, P for pen. And I'm going to make this little baby mountain that's in the front. And notice I'm always pulling my mountains all the way down to the ground. And this is strategic, friends. I do this on purpose, so that way when I bring this into After Effects for animation, it doesn't show the edges. Notice I also have a lot of overlap between my layers. When we're working with traditional illustrations, people sometimes won't fill in the background. So there will be like this beautiful background with like all these foreground elements, but if you turned off the foreground elements or you moved them, there will be holes in the design of the background, and you can't really do that with animation. So I have these mountains, but they are placed on top of my clouds, and I really don't want that. So I want to take at least some of my mountains and move them back. So I'm going to take all of these guys, drag them back, and then I'm going to move some of my clouds backward. And notice how I dragged them. I selected up here in the layers panel. I shift select the last of the batch, and then I just drag down. And I'm dragging it down so that I still see that like little line there. And that's a good thing, because then I can see like, okay, it's still in the same layer. So I want to take this particular cloud and drag it behind. Another way you can change the order of things is by going to the object menu, and there's a thing called arrange. And you can say send to back, and it'll just drop it all the way behind everything else. With this little cloud, I think I want it to be up here a little bit. And I'm holding spacebar to just shift down slightly. And I can see like, okay, that actually looks a little bit better like that. I'm going to close my Pathfinder, hit A for arrow, and just pull this upward. and then maybe pull this guy down a little bit. So you don't have to be totally true to your sketch, but you can use it as a guide to make your composition. Awesome. So if you have any questions, please type those into the chat and I'll be happy to help you. Okay, so now comes my favorite part. You ready for this? We're gonna make the snow on the caps of the mountains. So this is what we're making in the end, and this is the snow, okay? And it's like just sort of cute snow, and I'm gonna show you how to do it. So once again, clicking off with the selection tool, and then double clicking on the color, and I'm gonna choose like a light pink this time. And I'm gonna make my snow first, so just click drag with the pen tool every time to get the curves. And what I've discovered is that if you make the curves too extreme, the snow looks very young. So to adjust it, just hit A for open arrow and just reduce the amount of wobbliness so the sine wave is not as pronounced. Okay. All right, and then I'm going to do another one here. And remember, whenever possible, you want to redraw stuff rather than copying and pasting, because nature doesn't copy paste. And then the last one is going to be here. And let's just do that. Okay, cool. So I have my snow. But I want the snow to get punched out of the mountains. Now, one problem that happens when people punch out a cloud from, punch out the mountaintops from the top of the mountain is you end up with like a 1 pixel line. And I'm going to show you how to get around that. We don't want a 1 pixel line between our snow and our mountain. We want it to just feel as if it's all one thing. So first of all, I want to take this giant cloud and drag it above everybody else, okay? And I want to duplicate all of my mountains. So to do that, remember Alt drag, Alt drag, Alt drag, okay? Then I'm going to select with my selection tool a mountain and its corresponding snow. And then I go back to my Pathfinder window, and in the Pathfinder window, I want to choose intersect. So what that does is it creates the snow on its own layer, but I still have my original pink mountain, okay? And the pink mountain is in its entirety, meaning that there is no like seam between the pink mountain and the snow on top of it, okay? So I'm just gonna take that snow and drag it down a bunch, and I can group these together. Whoops, wrong one. I want to group, yeah, this and the snow on top, okay? Oh, wrong snow. Which snow was it? This snow. So there we go. So clicking the belly button, shift clicking the other belly button, and shift clicking the layer name, and then I'm just going to do Command or Control G. Control G on a PC, of course. So now I have that group ready to go. So I'm going to repeat this process with my other mountains. So I have my duplicated mountain, I have my snow, I'm going to shift click them both, and I'm going to do intersect. And then this guy can go on top here, click them both, clicking both the belly buttons, of course, and then Command G. And then I'm going to do with the last as well. So there's that snow. And some people, they'd be like, well, why didn't you just very carefully cut out the snow? Because I have better things to do, and so do you. So this is like a quick shortcut using the Pathfinder so that you don't have to like do this kind of gnarly point matching. Okay, so here's intersect, and now I have my paths. Now I want the snow to be like a lower opacity than my mountains, and we can totally do that. And yeah, let me just show you how to do that really quick. You would just turn on the little belly button next to the snow, go over to properties, and just reduce the opacity here. See that? And it works pretty good. And I just realized it probably shouldn't have grouped these guys, so I'm just going to click on the little belly button and do object ungroup, and then do the same thing here. Object ungroup. Okay, So we have all of that, and finally I'm going to create a layer in the back of everything that is going to be my background. So I'm going to click off of everything, double click this color chip, and I'm going to choose like a very contrasting color to make my sky. Rectangle, and turn off the black there, and I'm just going to draw my sky. It's okay if it's a little bit bigger than my artboard. It's ideal if it is, actually, and I'm just going to drag that beneath everything. Now the colors here look horrible, but we're going to fix that, so don't worry. This is a good point for me to stop and ask you guys, how is it going? Do you have questions? If you have questions, just type them into the comments or the chat, and I'll be happy to help you out. So the next thing I'm going to show you, and don't feel like you're interrupting if you chat, the next thing I'm going to show you is Adobe Color. So color.adobe.com, and in color.adobe.com you can actually input a photograph and then pull a color palette from that photograph. So if you go over to extract theme, you can drag and drop a photo right in there, and it's funny, it's very meta. I actually pulled the photo ref from the Adobe Color website. I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a great color, I'm totally going to use it. And it was just like fortuitous, but also very self-referential. So I'm going to take that photo ref, I'm going to drag and drop it into that create extract theme thing, and it pulls my colors for me, which is really, really good. Okay, great, Carol. Thank you for checking in. And so for these colors, you can add it to your library. I have an enterprise account because I work for a university, and so it gets complicated. I find the easiest way to pull these colors, honestly, is to just take a screenshot. And remember that with the color website, you can change between these different color harmonies. They're not harmonies, I would say color moods. It says extract using color mood. I liked the colorful one, and you can just do a screenshot, Command-Shift-4 on a Mac to create that screenshot, and that's just going to save it to your desktop. And that's how I was able to get that colors file right here. Okay, so we can import our colors, but I also like to import the photo that my color palette is based off of, and I'm going to put both of those into Illustrator, and I'm going to show you how to pull additional colors from your photo in Illustrator itself and how to expand your palette that way. Okay, so let's create a brand new layer for that, and I'm going to call this color, and I'm going to do my file place once more. And I'm going to place those two things. I'm going to place colors, and I like to do it outside of my artboard so I can see everything. Now, if you're not seeing the area outside of your artboard, it might be because you're in trim view. So just make sure you're not in trim view so you can see that. And then I'm going to do another file place, and I'm going to bring in my photo ref. Again, making sure that none of those linky things are turned on. And I'm just going to pull like that. Cool. Okay, so these colors are all well and good. I'm pretty excited about them. And the reason why I like them so much is because they do give a pretty good range of values, and value is the difference between light and dark. I also appreciate that we have both warm colors, which are the ones that are on the red side of the spectrum, and cool colors, which are those on the side of the blue side of the spectrum. And so it's got a nice range of both value and color temperature is what that's called. But it's not that many colors. We only have 5. So to expand my palette, what I often will do is I'll use a combination of different tools over here to add more colors to this. Okay, so I'll take my eyedropper tool, for example, and I'll come over to my photo reference, and let's just zoom in a little more on the photo reference, and I'm just doing Command+ to get closer. And maybe I want to choose like this color right in here. And then I can take the blob brush, click and hold the paintbrush to get there, and I can just come over here and I can paint with the blob brush. Okay, then I can hit I for my eyedropper and choose a different color, like maybe this one, and then Shift B for the blob and make another color, and then I for the eyedropper, and so on. And so I can add more colors to my palette by doing it that way. So this is like a slightly like darker color here. Shift B to get that blob, and then that's a slightly darker version. And I just move them so that they are, in terms of value and color, in between what we've already got. And this is like really close to the existing color, so maybe I won't use that one, but I like this guy, so I'm gonna move it like over here. Okay, I need some more light tones, so I'm gonna hit I for eyedropper. Oops, can't do that. It would change this existing color, so let me click off. I'm gonna hit I for eyedropper. I'm gonna come over here and just click on this yellow and Shift B to get my brush, my blob brush, and I can see that this still isn't as light as I want it. So I'm gonna get a lighter color still by taking that blob, alt dragging that blob, and then messing with it in my color window. So I'm gonna go to window, I'm gonna make sure color is showing, and oh, my color's on my other monitor here. Okay, and I want to make sure that in the color window over here where we have this little stack, I've chosen HSB. I find that this is the easiest in terms of color blending to get more and newer hues, saturations, and brightness. So the hue here is your color, right? So red, green, blue, like it's the spectrum. S is your saturation, how much color, like how much pigment is in this particular swatch. And then your brightness is how much black is in the thing. So if you want to make it darker, you just slide the brightness to the left. If you want it brighter, you drag it to the right. If you want to reduce the saturation, you would drag the S slider to the left. And you see how I'm getting like a little bit more of a creamy, like cream yellow white sort of thing. And that I find to be pretty nice. So I'm going to grab another color from my photo, I for eyedropper, and I'm actually going to pull this color and Shift B for the blob, and I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to duplicate it. So select, alt, drag, and this time I want it to be a little bit darker. I want it somewhere in between this color and this one. So I'm going to go back into my color. I'm going to drag my saturation higher. I'm going to drag my brightness a little lower. And I'm noticing that this is significantly more green than that one. So I'm actually going to take my rainbow in the hue and I'm going to push it to the right, which is going to make it more blue. So dropping the saturation, increasing the brightness. And now I have something that's kind of in between these. Okay. So if I click that and then I drop it like so. Okay, now if you love this color, if you're like, oh my gosh, this color is like super good, you can actually figure out what color it is specifically by double clicking the little chip, and it'll give you this hex code. And this hex code is a unique 6-digit code that's going to tune you into exactly that color, and you can just copy paste that color code into a variety of different windows in Illustrator or any pretty much any image editing program. Okay, so I'm going to pretend that these are all the colors that I need. I usually need more, but you know, time. So I'm going to zoom out, Z for zoom, option click to zoom out. Nice. Okay, and now I'm going to tackle the gradient in the background first. So I'm going to go over to my done version, this I refer to as my cheat sheet, and I want my background to be this gradient going from the dark coral color down to a much lighter coral color. So I'm going to go to my gradient, and if you don't see the gradient, it might be hiding under the mesh, G for gradient, and over here I want to choose gradient in the toolbox for my color filling. Okay, there's the gradient. So it's not doing anything right now because that layer wasn't selected. So if I click the layer and then I go to gradient, notice how it changed it to a black to white gradient. Now we don't want that. We want it to be dark peach at a dark coral at the top, and at the bottom we want it to be peach. So we want to rotate this first of all. So in the gradient window, you have the option of rotating your gradient. So I'm going to do 90 degrees. Okay. And then you can change your colors pretty easily. Just click on this dark chip, and then see this eyedropper that showed up? I can just click on that and come over here and grab up my coral. And then I can click on my white chip, click the eyedropper here, and I can come over and choose this lighter. Ooh, that's like the same color. And then I can mess with it. So I've chosen the lighter peachish color. I don't like the yellow. I want something that's like a brighter version of this. So I'm just going to come in here to my color picker, switch over again to HSB, and then reduce the saturation of that color. Since it's highlighted, I can just do it live. And that's going to be pretty nice. And maybe add a little bit of yellow to it. Not too much, but just a touch. And then you can adjust how much, like where that gradient starts and ends by pulling these little sliders here. Your sliders might be smaller than mine. It's the same thing. And then you can just pull the midpoint wherever you want it. Okay. So going over here, I can see that this color is a little bit too dark. So I can use my eyedropper and just come over here and choose this color, and then maybe mess with it by increasing the saturation, dropping the brightness a touch, and then maybe making it slightly more red. Okay, and slightly less saturated. So when in doubt, I always tell folks to drop the satch. That means drop your saturation whenever you're not sure about your colors. Generally speaking, if you're new with color, you're gonna oversaturate everything. You're just gonna put super like rich colors on top of each other, and it's gonna be a disaster. So let's go through and add color to all of this. And I'm going to add color by adding gradients. Every time I'm done with a layer though, I'm gonna lock it so I don't mess it up. Okay, so I turn that off, and then let's tackle the mountains next, because the color of the clouds is going to depend on the color of the mountains. So if I look at my done version, I can see that like the hero mountain in the middle here is like a dark blue to this, it's like dark blue to like this kind of brightish blue. So let's come over here and with the selection tool, select our hero mountain, that's the red one, and I'm going to choose gradient, and then I can modify that gradient over here. So clicking that color, clicking the eyedropper, and then coming over here and choosing like this, and then choose this color, and we have our eyedropper, and choose the dark. And let's see how we did compared to our done version. And that's not quite there. So let's mess with some things some more. So this color here at the top should actually be over on the side. Okay. And by the side, I mean, it should be this type of gradient going at a diagonal rather than a vertical gradient. So I actually wrote down like what the angle is. It should be 45. So I'm going to go over here and change it to 45. And then I'm going to change this color to be like a much deeper blue. So I go over to my color picker, drop the brightness, maybe drop the saturation a touch, and I want it much deeper. And then this guy here, I want it to be brighter. So I could grab my eyedropper and just come over here like this, and then I can see that that's maybe better, or maybe like that. And then again, I'm going to mess with my saturation. I'm going to maybe make it a little brighter and make it a little bluer. So I'm going to drag it to the right. And just comparing. Yeah, that's not too bad. Okay, so that's a gradient that I'm going to use over here. Now I got to fix the snow because the snow is kind of pink. So to change the snow to just be pure white, I would choose this little chip down here, just making sure that the fill color is selected. And of course, if you have any questions, type them into the chat or the comments. Happy to help you. I'm going to drop the opacity of this. And if you don't feel like always going back to the properties, I feel you, make sure you have the transparency window open then. And then you can just drop your transparency of that individual layer and you'll have reduced opacity snow. I want this to basically be the same color as this one behind. So I'm gonna click on that foreground mountain, hit I for eyedropper, and click on that one over there. And this one is gonna be at 30 degrees. Okay. And I want to mess with its color in that I want it to feel like it's coming forward, and that it's not as important. So I'm going to mess with the color a little bit here as well, just so it's not exactly the same thing. Because remember, nature, not exactly the same thing, and so on. So I grab the gradient, click that gradient slider here. And notice what happened when I clicked in between, and then I was like, oops, extra color. Just pull it down or pull it over, it'll go away. And then this guy, I can just drop the saturation a little. I can maybe swivel the hue, make it maybe slightly greener, drop the saturation some more, maybe make it a little darker. Okay, and then do the same thing with the brighter color. Okay. Okay, now things in the foreground in landscapes tend to be more saturated and darker than things in the background. And so I'm doing that over here just by messing with my different values and hues and saturations. So right here, I'm going to increase the saturation. When you go to darker colors, it's okay to increase saturation. It's not a big deal. Okay, so once again with the snow, clicking that top snow, clicking the white fill, and in the transparency, just making sure that that's reduced. And it doesn't have to be the same transparency every time, folks. Okay, this guy, while I'm here, might as well do the other snow and drop that opacity too. This back mountain is the trickiest. We want it to really recede. We really want it to feel like it's in the background. So I'm gonna hit I for eyedropper, click on this one here, and I want the gradient on this to be at 90 degrees. So I'm going to change this to 90. Okay, and having the different angles for my gradient really kind of helps to keep them apart from each other, because otherwise it just sort of blends into one chunk. And then with this, I want to mess with the colors some more. Notice in my final version, this is like really washed out and pushed back because it's more gray. So let's come over here. Ooh, I haven't saved yet. I should save. So, all right. Let us mess with these colors now. And the thing I like about this, friends, is that when I have a gradient selected and I'm messing with it, it doesn't change the gradient for like the whole entire illustration. It just changes that particular gradient. So I'm gonna go into my color, increase the brightness, and drop the sat. Whenever you increase the brightness, drop your saturation. Otherwise things just start getting really like Crayola. Here's my other color, dropping the saturation, increasing the brightness. And maybe I want to add well, yeah, a little purplish. Yeah, that wouldn't be too bad. And dropping the saturation some more. And maybe less bright. So you don't want it to be so bright that it takes your attention away from our hero mountain. And I can drop the opacity of my snow as well, so that, again, it doesn't take attention away from the hero mountain. I always want it to stand out somewhat, but I don't want it to blend. So this guy, let's just do that. Yeah, that's starting to look pretty good. And notice I'm squinting my eyes as I'm looking at the illustration to make sure that I'm able to, like, you know, differentiate between the different objects in the illustration. Carol says, did not know about HSB. Good to know. I know it's so much easier to blend colors using hue, saturation, brightness, and that's the default when you're working in Photoshop, but it's not the default when you're working in Illustrator. So I'm glad that was helpful. For our clouds, the clouds basically all have the same gimmick. And just to make things a little easier, but also to show you guys another cool trick, I'm going to click on this gradient slider and double click that color. It brings up my color picker, and if I go over to RGB, it gives me the hex code in the lower right corner. So I can copy that hexadecimal code, which is BDA 5A9. So the next time someone asks you, like, what's your favorite color? You can say BDA 5A9, and they'll be like, oh, good choice, it's puce. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go over to my version, and I'm going to choose, I'm just going to use like the background gradient as my basis. I'm going to change the angle so that it's was it 90 degrees? No, it's the reverse. It was, yeah, it was negative 90. Okay, and then I can mess with my colors. So that first color on top was the puce, and that I copied the hex code. I can just paste it right in here, hit return, it's done, and then I can come over to done and double click this color, and it brings up my color panel, and I can always go over to RGB and check that out. All right, so now I have that color, and going back to my version here, double click, paste, enter. Okay, so that's okay. I'm not totally opposed to that. We can increase how much of the cloud is this color just by shifting where it falls on the gradient. And then I can, of course, continue to tweak my colors if I wish. But we're kind of running out of time, so I want to make sure we get through everything. I'm going to select this guy with my selection tool, hit I for eyedropper, and click on this cloud. Make sure that's set to 90. Okay, maybe negative 90. And then I'm going to hit V to select this guy, I for eyedropper, and click this one, and negative 90. Okay, and of course, like I said, you want to avoid too much copy paste, so I would probably go back into this and mess with my colors a little bit, because like this puce is getting lost against the background. So I would go into my color slider and I would mess with my saturation. Well, I probably drop the saturation and increase the brightness, and that makes that cloud stand out so much more against the background. And then if I have this selected, I can mess with where that gradient is falling. Yeah, I like that. So I'm actually going to do the same thing for the background and then tweak it. I, there, V, click. Okay, I think that's fine. Awesome. So what you might have noticed, I noticed this and I was like, this is terrible. Look at these stripes that are happening in my gradients. They're like not my favorite. And this is what happens anytime you're using gradients or anything that has some softness to it and it's going digital. So in After Effects, I always apply a noise layer, and if we were prepping this for After Effects, I wouldn't be able to do this because it does screw up your edges. But if you're just taking this and posting it to Instagram or putting it on your portfolio, the way you would go about adding noise to this is fairly simple. So you would click on the uppermost thing here, turning off any any locked paths. You're going to turn off all the locks. And then you're going to go over to Effect, Artistic, Film Grain. Okay? And what we're trying to do is we're trying to confuse our web browser, like photo, JPEG, whatever algorithm, into not showing stripes and oversimplifying our gradient into that kind of gnarly like rainbow look, but instead to give it that smooth gradientness that we need. Now this is horrible. I don't know what is going on here. This is like super bad. So I'm going to cancel it and I'm going to try again. So once again, Effect, artistic film grain. Huh. Okay, so I'm going to have to try a few things and then come back to it. It did it perfectly when I practiced it before. Okay, so we want to drop the intensity. Okay, there we go. It's because the intensity was too hot. We want to drop the intensity and we want to drop the amount of grain. Okay, and there's like a highlight area thing. And that's not terrible, but you want to balance the low intensity and the amount of grain with getting rid of those rainbow stripes and like not messing with your initial design. And you don't want it to be too much. I find I have so much more control over grain when I do it in Photoshop or After Effects, but you know, we make do. I'm gonna do 1.5. Yeah, that looks better. So that's gonna give me a nice broken down, like, let's give this, if you do a little highlight area, it's not too bad. Yeah, okay. So I did 2, 6, and 0 for my film grain, and then I hit OK. And when I click off, you can see that the film grain has been applied. Alternatively, you could totally do this in Photoshop and have a lot more control over it, and then that will just fill your life with so much more joy. You can also alternatively go to Effect Gallery. Oh, you know what it was? I did the Photoshop version. So hold on, let me get rid of it. So if you click on the little layer belly button, you go to Properties, and you go over here, it says Film Grain. You can trash the film grain, and then you can start fresh. So Effect, yeah, that was what I did. Stylize, no. Yeah, they are, yeah, you're gonna have to do it from the Photoshop effects layer, I'm sorry. I can always add it back in. I can just undo. There, it's back. Okay, so again, the way that I got to where the film grain was just by clicking on the little belly button, going over to Properties, and locating this little FX. Alternatively, you can click on the Appearance panel by clicking these 3 dots over here, and then you can see this film grain. You can highlight it, and you can trash it that way if you need to. I wish there was a way to like reduce the opacity of it, but it just takes you back to that same window, which is not that useful. But anyways, the last thing I'm going to cover is how you export this as a PNG or JPEG file so that you can share it with people, because what good is an Illustrator layer if you can't share it? So what we're going to do, we save our file. You should have saved it if you didn't already. And you're going to go to File menu, Export for screens. That's what I usually use. Export as doesn't give you, well, yeah, you could do, yeah, let's do that one instead. File, Export as. And then we're going to come over here and we're going to tell it format PNG. You can say use artboards, and you just want the first artboard because that's all we had. And then hit export. Okay, so we just did file, export as, PNG. Alternatively, you could do JPEG. I prefer PNG, it tends to be a little bit sharper. Use artboards, range 1, export, and you can choose the resolution. So I'm going to choose high, why not? Background color, transparent, white. Let's just do transparent, see what happens. Hit OK. It's coming. Okay, and then if I go over here, it's going to open it up. Not too bad. I think the grain's a little intense, but one kind of easy way that you could deal with that is if you exported it once like this, and then you exported it again with the film grain turned off. So just like temporarily disable it or trash it. And then you can layer them in Photoshop just pretty easily using some opacity. let me just show you how to do that while I export this guy. So File, Export again, Export As, and I'm going to do this with no grain. Oh, rats. I forgot to say artboard, and because when I was doing the export I forgot to say artboard, what it did was it actually like exported everything, including my color palettes, including everything else. So make sure that if you're using this off stage area for your color picking, that when you do your file export, you specify to use the artboards, okay? And this is going to be KK version, no grain, export, fine, good. Okay, and then in Photoshop, which is opening ever so slowly, I'm going to layer those on top of each other and then reduce the opacity of one instead of the other. Now, we have a little bit of time while Photoshop's opening. Let me just briefly cover how you would prep this for After Effects. So if you were prepping this for After Effects, you also wouldn't want to have the grain on it, okay? So you would need to separate each thing that's going to animate separately into its own individual layer. So for example, the snow and the mountains could be grouped together. The clouds should each be on their separate layer. The background should each be on its separate layer, and each cloud with its respective, sorry, each mountain with its respective snow would be on its own layer. So what I would do is first I would group everything. So click and shift click, Command G, click and shift click, Command G. And I'm doing all this with the selection tool. Click and shift click, Command G. And then I have a little trick. You ready? I click the little belly button next to the main layer name. I click the layer, and then I go up to this stack. And in the stack, I choose Release to Layers Sequence. Now what that's going to do is it's going to create a whole bunch of sub-layers. So what we have right now are paths and groups. Sub-layers are like regular layers, except they live inside of an existing layer. So if I go to File, Release to Layers, sorry, the little layer menu, Release to Layers Sequence, it creates all these different little layers that are just called layer, layer, layer. These guys don't have anything on them, or rather they have my like previous groups on them. So I can trash them. So anytime there's a layer that you don't want, just click its name and click the little garbage and it goes away. And remember, I had duplicated my clouds in order to make the gradients. And then to separate these to individual layers, I would click, shift click, and then drag up a level, like in between stuff, or drag all the way down and then release my mouse. And then if I don't have too many layers, it wouldn't hurt to just relabel them. So I would call this C1. I would call this C2. I would call this C2. I would call this mountain front. And you can always click on them if you're not sure what you're naming. Mountain main. And then this one would be mountain back. And I'm just renaming by double clicking the layer name. So this guy here is my left cloud and so on. So C left. And then this is my BG. Okay, so I think Photoshop should be open by now. Okay, I'm gonna open that file and I'm just gonna reduce the opacity of the grain version on top of the one that has no grain. And so I'm going to start with the no grain version, and I hit open. I know, it was supposed to be an Illustrator tutorial, right? Why am I in Photoshop? Because they work together. They work together really well. They're like really wonderful coworkers. So let's just expand this, close that. So this is the no grain version, and we're not seeing the like little rainbow stripes just yet, which is a good thing. We don't want to, but when we go to the internet, you better believe those stripes are going to come up. It's going to look bad. So to place the other thing exactly on top of this one, I'm going to do File, Place Embedded, and I'm going to choose the grain version, Place. And see how it gives me like an X on top? That means I need to actually approve that. So I'm going to hit the little checkbox. And then I'm going to reduce the opacity of the grain version just somewhat so that I have a hint of grain without it being as extreme as it was. Like this was like starting to get kind of rustic, but not in a good way. Like rustic, like rusty rustic. So this looks considerably more subtle, but it's enough grain that I think that it'll make a difference when we go to digital. Okay. All right, friends. Well, that is all she wrote for today. If you have any lingering questions, feel free to type those into the chat. Alternatively, you can type them into the comments. Thank you for joining me this morning. This was a lot of fun. In a future tutorial, I will show you how to put this into Adobe After Effects and create like a parallax style camera move on it. And this Monday, which is October 18th, I'm going to be doing a live stream on animating these really cool geometric designs that I did a couple of weeks ago. It's called the Jack and Jones animation. So check my channel for that. As usual, if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe this video. Like the video and subscribe to my channel. And if you want to follow me on social or sign up for my newsletter so that you're sure to be informed about future free live streams and events, just check the description below. All that information is there. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a lot of fun teaching you how to make a nice looking landscape design from a rather gnarly sketch. And I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you. Bye.